Amanda held her 7-month belly as if it were her passport to eternal wealth. She had managed to tear the millionaire away from his wife, destroyed a marriage of years, and secured her brilliant future. But when Susan walked into that party radiant, alongside another man, Amanda discovered that some victories can turn into the greatest public humiliation of your life, and that not all secrets stay buried forever. Susan was folding clothes in the bedroom when Mark's phone vibrated on the bed. She didn't even pay attention at first, concentrated on the shirts that needed ironing, but the device wouldn't stop buzzing. One message after another, as if it were urgent. Curious, she approached and saw the name on the screen. Amanda. Who was Amanda? Mark had never mentioned an Amanda at the office. Her heart began to beat faster. That bad feeling you get when something isn't right. The screen lit up again. Another message from this Amanda, and another. Susan looked at the bedroom door. She heard Mark in the shower, the water running. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. She knew she shouldn't look, but something inside her screamed that she needed to know. The first message she read made her world collapse. "Babe, I can't hide it anymore. Our baby is growing, and I can't hide it anymore." Susan read it again, thinking she had misunderstood. Mark was going to be a father? But how, if they had been trying to have children for years? Her hands shook so much she almost dropped the phone. She scrolled up, reading message by message. "I love you, my borrowed husband. I can't wait for you to get rid of her. Our baby will be born in the mansion she thinks is hers." Every word was a knife to the chest. Mark had a mistress, and this mistress was expecting his child. The child Susan had dreamed of giving him for so long. The child doctors said she couldn't have. Susan sat on the bed, her legs weak. How many times had she blamed herself for not being able to get pregnant? How many nights had she cried hidden in the bathroom, thinking she was an incomplete wife? And now she discovered Mark had conceived a baby with another woman. The sound of the shower stopped. Mark was going to come out any second. Susan put the phone back exactly where it was and tried to pretend she was folding clothes. But the tears wouldn't stop flowing. How was she going to pretend she knew nothing? Mark stepped out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist, humming softly. He looked happy, happier than he had been in a long time. Now she understood why. He had a pregnant girlfriend waiting for him somewhere. "What's with that face, honey?" Mark asked, seeing her swollen face. "Why are you crying?" Susan stared at him. 12 years married. 12 years building a life together. And he asked with that innocent face, as if he weren't destroying everything behind her back. "Who is Amanda?" The question came out softly, but cut through the silence of the room like a razor. Mark stopped drying himself. His expression changed instantly. The smile vanished. His shoulders grew tense. He knew he had been caught. "How did you find out about her?" Mark didn't deny it. He didn't pretend he didn't know an Amanda. He only wanted to know how Susan had found out. "Your phone wouldn't stop ringing. She sent messages saying you're going to be a father." Susan tried to keep her voice steady, but she was breaking inside. Mark sighed deeply and sat on the bed, far from her. "Susan, I can explain." "Explain what? That you have a mistress? That she's pregnant? That you two are making plans behind my back?" Her voice was rising, all the pain coming out at once. "It wasn't planned. It just happened." "Happened?" Susan stood up, indignant. "Did you trip and fall on top of her? Did she get pregnant from the wind?" Mark lowered his head. "It started a few months ago. She works in the building next to the office. We met for lunch sometimes." "A few months ago?" Susan felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. "How many months, Mark?" 8. 8 months. He had been cheating on her for 8 months, and she hadn't noticed a thing. How does a wife not realize her husband has someone else for that long? All those extended meetings, those working weekends, those phone calls he took in the backyard. And the baby? She is pregnant, yes, Mark said, as if he were announcing the weather. No emotion, no remorse. Susan collapsed to the floor. Literally. Her legs couldn't take it anymore, and she sat right there on the bedroom rug, crying like a child. All that suffering for not being able to give Mark a child. All those doctor appointments. All those painful treatments. And he had conceived a baby with the first woman who came along. Susan, get up from there. Mark tried to help her, but she pulled away. Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me. Again. She got up on her own, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I'm going to take responsibility for the baby, Mark said, as if he were doing her a favor. Amanda deserves it. And me? Do I deserve nothing? You're a wonderful woman, Susan, but you can't give me children. Amanda did. The cruelty of that sentence echoed in the room. Susan looked at the man she had married, the man she had dreamed of building a family with, and saw a stranger. A cold man, capable of throwing the thing that hurt her most in her face. So that's it? You're going to abandon me because of a belly? It's not just the belly. It's that with Amanda I feel young again. She's different. She's what? Prettier, younger, speak up. Mark hesitated, but the truth came out. She's everything I ever wanted in a woman. Those words were the final shot. Susan realized she had lost not only her husband, but also the illusion that she had ever been loved by him. If Amanda was everything he ever wanted, then she had never been anything. I'm going to pack my bags. Mark stood up and started grabbing clothes from the closet. Are you leaving today? Amanda is waiting for me. I've already rented an apartment for us. Susan couldn't believe it. He already had an apartment with his mistress. He already had a life set up while she played house alone. How many nights had she prepared a special dinner waiting for him to arrive, not knowing he was building a new family with another woman? Mark filled 2 suitcases with his most important things. Susan stood in the corner of the room, watching her entire life being dismantled in a matter of minutes. 12 years summarized in 2 suitcases. When he finished, he approached her. Susan, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve to find out this way. And how did I deserve to find out? When Amanda was in the maternity ward, giving birth to your child? Mark didn't answer. He took his bags and headed for the door. Just as he was leaving, his phone rang. He answered it in front of Susan, without any shame. Hi, my love. I'm on my way. Yes, she knows everything now. Mark looked at Susan as he spoke. No, it wasn't hard. She understood the situation. Susan felt a rage rise through her chest that she had never felt in her life. How dare he say she had understood the situation? How dare he talk to his mistress in front of her as if she were a piece of furniture? Tell her I didn't understand anything. Susan spoke loud enough for Amanda to hear on the other end. Tell her that after years of marriage, I didn't understand how you turned into a man with no character. Mark hung up the phone quickly. There's no need to be rude. Rude? Me? Susan laughed, but there was nothing funny about that laugh. I'm not the rude one here. He left without looking back. Susan heard the car starting in the garage, the gate opening, the sound of the engine fading away, and then, finally, silence. A silence that hurt more than any scream. She looked at herself in the bedroom mirror, disheveled hair, face swollen from crying, wrinkled nightgown. That was how years of marriage ended, with her shattered in an empty room, while Mark ran into the arms of a woman pregnant with the child that should have been hers. That night, Susan slept on the side of the bed that had always been only hers. But for the first time, the bed felt immense and freezing, and she had no idea that this was just the beginning. The worst was yet to come. Months passed, and Susan discovered that the pain of betrayal was like a wound that wouldn't heal. Every morning, she woke up hoping it had been a terrible nightmare, But the empty bed beside hers confirmed it was all too real. It was when her friends started sending photos via WhatsApp that Susan understood the scale of the public humiliation she was facing. The first photo showed Mark and Amanda entering a baby store in the city's most expensive mall. She was radiant, her belly now very apparent, choosing a crib that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The second photo hurt even more. Amanda was posting on social media, showing her belly, writing, "When God closes a door, he opens a gate. My prince finally got rid of the past, and now it's just the three of us. Me, him, and our baby." Susan read that post dozens of times. Got rid of the past. That was how Amanda referred to her, as if 12 years of marriage were just an obstacle Mark had overcome, as if she were an old piece of furniture finally thrown out. But it was the third photo that made Susan understand Mark hadn't just abandoned her. He had planned to erase any trace of her from his life. The image showed Amanda inside the house where Susan had lived for so many years, redecorating. The curtains Susan had chosen were being replaced. The garden she cared for every weekend was being renovated. Amanda wasn't just taking Susan's husband, she was taking her whole life. That same day, Susan received a visit from a lawyer, an elegant man with an expensive leather briefcase and a professional smile. He handed her a stack of papers that would make anyone collapse. "Ma'am, your husband is filing for divorce, and here are the conditions he is offering." Susan read every line of those documents, feeling her heart break a little more. Mark wanted to keep the house, the company they had built together, the savings, everything. For her, he offered an amount that could barely rent a decent apartment for a couple of years. "And if I don't accept?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "Ma'am, your husband has the resources to prolong this process for years, and during that time you will have access to nothing. Not the house, not the money. He suggests you accept the proposal to avoid further embarrassment." Further embarrassment. As if it weren't embarrassment enough to discover her husband had a pregnant mistress and now wanted to leave his wife in misery. "What's his hurry?" Susan asked, though she already knew the answer. "The baby will be born in a few months. Your husband wants to regularize the situation before then." Regularize the situation. What an elegant expression for saying Mark wanted to get rid of his legitimate wife before officializing his new family. Susan signed the papers that same day, not because she agreed, but because she didn't have the strength to fight. Every day that passed, she felt lonelier, more tired, more invisible. It was as if Amanda had stolen not just her husband, but her will to fight. Days later, the worst news arrived. An acquaintance called saying she had seen Mark at the notary's office, changing his will. Everything he owned would now be left to Amanda and the baby. If anything happened to him, Susan wouldn't even inherit the watch she had given him as a wedding gift. But the final humiliation came when Susan was forced to leave the house. Amanda wanted to move in before the baby was born, and Mark had given Susan a 1-week deadline to remove her things. Susan spent that week packing 12 years of life into cardboard boxes. Every object she packed told a story. The dishes they got for their wedding, the photos of the trips they took together, the books they read before bed, everything going into boxes, as if they were just worthless objects. On the last day, as she was removing the final items, Amanda arrived with Mark to supervise the move. Susan saw her in person for the first time and had to admit she understood Mark's fascination. Amanda was truly beautiful, young, blonde, with that special glow pregnant women have. "Wow, you kept a lot of useless stuff," Amanda commented, looking at Susan's boxes. "Good thing I'll be able to redecorate everything from scratch." Mark said nothing. He stood there, watching Susan carry the heaviest boxes alone, as if she were a hired mover. "Mark, can you help me with this box?" Susan asked, pointing to a box full of books. "Amanda is pregnant. "I can't carry heavy weight and make her nervous," he replied, without even looking at Susan. Amanda smiled victoriously. "It's true. The doctor said I need to avoid any kind of stress, and seeing an ex-wife is kind of stressful, right?" Susan carried the box alone, and all the others, too. Mark stood by Amanda, with his hand on her belly, as if protecting a treasure. When Susan put the last box in the moving truck, Amanda made sure to strike one last blow. "Susan, not to be mean, but you should take this move as a chance to restart your life. Look for someone your own age. Someone who doesn't want kids. Because let's face it, right? You tried with Mark for so many years and never succeeded. Maybe it's better to accept it's just not meant to be." Every word from Amanda was like a punch to the stomach. Susan looked at Mark, hoping he would say something to minimally defend her dignity. But he remained silent, caressing his girlfriend's belly. "You're right," Susan replied, surprising both of them. "I really do need to restart my life." Amanda smiled, thinking she had won completely. But something in Susan's tone made Mark frown. There was a determination there that he didn't expect. Susan climbed into the moving truck and waved to the both of them. "Take good care of the house. I built it with a lot of love." As the truck pulled away, Susan saw in the rearview mirror Amanda and Mark entering the house that was once hers. Amanda was laughing, pointing to the garden, probably planning all the changes she would make. At that moment, driving to the tiny apartment she had managed to rent, Susan made a decision. She wasn't going to cry forever. She wasn't going to let Amanda and Mark think they had destroyed her completely. They thought they had won. They thought they had gotten everything they wanted without consequences. But life has a curious way of teaching lessons to those who think they can step on others without a problem. Susan didn't know how yet, but she was certain that one day the truth would come to light. And when that happened, Amanda would discover that some victories cost much more than we imagine. As she drove through the city, seeing life going on normally for everyone else, Susan made a silent promise to herself. She wasn't going to stay in the victim position forever. She would find a way to rise again, to rebuild herself, to prove she was worth much more than Mark and Amanda imagined. Because sometimes, when we lose everything, that is exactly when we discover what we are truly capable of. The apartment Susan managed to rent was in an old building, far from everything she knew. 2 tiny rooms, a kitchen the size of a closet, and a window that faced the neighbor's wall. It was the complete opposite of the spacious house where she had lived for so many years, but it was what her money allowed now. In the first week, she still hoped her friends would show up to visit her, to offer support, to show she wasn't completely alone in the world. But the phone didn't ring. WhatsApp messages decreased every day. And when they did ring, they were always the same kind. "Susan, heard about the divorce. Tough situation, right? But life goes on." The first betrayal from her friends came through Kelly, her best friend for 15 years. They had shared secrets, trips, whole afternoons, talking about husbands, dreams, and fears. Susan thought if anyone would be on her side, it would be Kelly. That was until she saw the photos on Instagram. Kelly was at Amanda's birthday party, smiling, toasting, celebrating as if nothing had happened. In the caption, she wrote, "Celebrating life and new beginnings with special people." Susan looked at that photo dozens of times, trying to understand how a person who claimed to be her friend could be celebrating with the woman who had destroyed her marriage. But the explanation arrived the next day via a cold message from Kelly. "Susan, you need to understand that we can't choose sides. Mark is our friend too. Amanda seems like a nice person, and they are happy. We can't stay stuck in the past." Stuck in the past. As if 12 years of marriage were just a phase Susan needed to get over quickly so as not to bother anyone. The second betrayal came in an even crueler way. Susan discovered she had lost her job at the marketing firm where she had worked for 8 years. The boss, Mr. Robinson, called her in on a Friday and explained with embarrassment that they were going to have to restructure her department. "It's an economic issue, Susan. You understand, right?" But Susan wasn't a fool. She knew Mark had influence in that company. He had several contracts with them. He moved a lot of money, and now that she was no longer his wife, she had become a problem. "Mr. Robinson, does this have to do with my divorce?" The man lowered his head, confirming without needing to speak. "Susan, you are an excellent professional, but the situation got complicated. Mark suggested it would be better for everyone if you sought other horizons." Other horizons. What an elegant expression to say her ex-husband had asked for her to be fired. Susan left that office carrying a box with her personal belongings, feeling she was losing much more than a job. She was losing the identity she had built for years, her professional respect, and her financial independence. But the worst betrayal of all came from her own family. Susan called her older sister Rose, hoping to find at least a little understanding there. The two had always been close. They shared everything since they were little. "Rose, I need to talk to someone. I'm feeling very alone." "Susan, look, I understand your pain, but you need to reflect." "What kind of reflection? Maybe you failed as a wife. Maybe you left Mark lacking in something. A man doesn't cheat without a reason." Her sister's words hurt more than anything Mark or Amanda had said. It was her own family blaming her for the betrayal she had suffered. "How can you say something like that?" "Susan, sorry to be blunt, but you could never give him children. Any man would end up looking for that elsewhere, and now Amanda achieved what you couldn't." Susan hung up the phone and cried for hours. Even her family was on Mark's side. Even the people who should love her unconditionally thought she deserved to be abandoned for not being able to get pregnant. The following days were a mixture of unemployment, loneliness, and despair. Susan began leaving the house only to buy essentials, avoiding places where she might meet acquaintances. Each outing was a risk of hearing mean comments or receiving looks of pity. It was on one of those days, at the supermarket, that she had the most humiliating encounter of all. Susan was in the checkout line when she heard a familiar laugh behind her. She turned and saw Amanda with 2 friends, pushing a cart full of expensive products. Her belly was even larger, and she wore clothes that cost more than Susan's apartment rent. "Girls, you won't believe what happened yesterday," Amanda spoke loudly, as if she wanted everyone to hear. Mark's ex-wife called him crying, asking to borrow money, said she's having a hard time. The friends laughed as if it were the funniest joke in the world. "Really? And what did he say?" "He said she needs to learn to fend for herself, that she's not his problem anymore." Amanda laughed even louder. "Imagine, a woman her age, no child, no husband, no job. She must be desperate." Susan felt the floor disappear. She had never called Mark asking for money. Amanda was making up that story just to humiliate her publicly, and she took it with a smirk. She didn't even call back. She must have gotten the message. Amanda adjusted her belly with pride. Poor thing. She must be realizing now that she lost the only man who would ever want her. Susan couldn't stay in line anymore. She abandoned her groceries in the cart and ran out of the supermarket, hearing Amanda's laughter echoing behind her. She got home distraught, realizing she had nowhere left to run. Her friends had chosen Mark's side. Her family thought she deserved to be abandoned. Work had become impossible due to her ex-husband's influence, and now Amanda was spreading lies about her in public. That night, Susan looked at herself in the tiny bathroom mirror and saw a woman she didn't recognize. Hair uncut for weeks, eyes swollen from crying, pale skin from staying out of the sun. It was as if the Susan who existed before had died along with the marriage. She picked up the phone and for a few moments considered calling Mark. Not to ask for money, as Amanda had invented, but to beg him to stop destroying what remained of her life, to ask for a little compassion for what they had lived together. But as she was about to dial, she remembered the coldness with which he had left the house, the way he had stayed silent while Amanda humiliated her, how he had asked for her to be fired. Mark wasn't going to have pity on her. He would just tell Amanda that the ex-wife had called crying, giving more ammunition for public humiliation. Susan dropped the phone and made the hardest decision of her life. She was going to have to rebuild everything alone. She was going to have to find strength she didn't know she had, because waiting for compassion from those who had betrayed and abandoned her was only prolonging the suffering. In the middle of that night, alone in the silent apartment, Susan made a promise to herself. She wasn't going to let Amanda and Mark have the pleasure of seeing her destroyed forever. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of confirming that she was truly a woman of no value. Because sometimes, when you lose out everything and everyone, that's when you discover the only person you can truly trust is yourself. And that, as scary as it is, can be the beginning of a strength she never imagined existed. But Susan still didn't know that the worst was just beginning, and that the humiliations she had suffered so far would seem small compared to what Amanda was planning for her. Some time had passed since the humiliating encounter at the supermarket, and Susan had made a decision that would change everything. She was no longer going to accept being the silent victim everyone stepped on. If Amanda and Mark thought they had won completely, they were about to discover that Susan still had a few cards up her sleeve. The first thing she did was use some of the little money she had to hire a private investigator. It wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. She needed to find out who Amanda really was, because something about that woman didn't add up. The investigator was named Charles, a discreet man who had worked on infidelity cases for over 15 years. When Susan explained the situation, he nodded knowingly. "Ma'am, it's not the first time I've seen this kind of case. Young women who appear out of nowhere in the lives of wealthy men. Almost always, there's more to it." "What kind of thing?" "We'll find out, but give me some time." While waiting for the results of the investigation, Susan decided to do her own research. She started with Amanda's social media, studying every photo, every post, every comment. And that's when she noticed the first strange thing. Amanda claimed to have graduated in business administration from an expensive private college in the city. But when Susan called there, pretending to be a company interested in hiring, she discovered that no Amanda with that last name had ever graduated from that institution. The second lie appeared when Susan investigated Amanda's professional history. She claimed to work for a digital marketing company. But when Susan passed by the address Amanda listed on LinkedIn, she found only an abandoned building. "Who are you really, Amanda?" Susan whispered to herself, sitting in front of the computer in the middle of the night. The answer came when Charles called with the first findings. "Mrs. Susan, sit down, because what I'm about to tell you will shock you." Susan prepared for the worst, but nothing could have prepared her for what she heard. "Amanda has done this before, 3 times. "What do you mean?" "She has a pattern. She looks for older, married men with money, approaches them, seduces them, gets pregnant, and then takes everything she can. The ex-husbands pay alimony. She keeps the apartment, car, jewelry." Susan's heart raced. "And the other men? What happened to them?" "One of them went bankrupt, paying alimony for a child he later discovered wasn't his. The other had severe depression and had to be hospitalized. The third managed to prove in court that he was deceived, but he had already lost his house, company, family." Susan felt a mixture of horror and relief. Horror to discover Amanda was even worse than she imagined. Relief to know she wasn't crazy, that there really was something wrong with that woman. "There's more, ma'am. Amanda uses fake names. Her real name is Tiffany Banks, and she has a police record for fraud. A police record? She ran a scam on the elderly, pretending to be a nurse, took jewelry and money from several families before being caught. Susan hung up the phone, trembling. Mark hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been completely deceived by a professional criminal, a woman who made destroying families a way of life. But there was one piece of the puzzle that still didn't fit: the pregnancy. If Amanda was so calculating, why had she gotten pregnant so quickly? That wasn't part of her pattern with the other men. The answer came when Susan decided to follow Amanda personally. She spent an entire afternoon observing her routine, and that's when she saw something that changed everything. Amanda left the apartment she shared with Mark and went straight to a cafe downtown. There, she met a young, dark-haired man who kissed her on the mouth before she even sat down. Susan almost choked on the air. Amanda was cheating on Mark. The woman who had destroyed her marriage was doing exactly the same thing to Mark. But the biggest shock came when she overheard their conversation. She moved closer, pretending to read a book at a nearby table, and listened to every word. "Babe, I can't stand pretending this baby is the old man's anymore," Amanda spoke softly, but Susan could hear perfectly. "Calm down, my love. Not much longer. When it's born, we'll disappear with his money and live our lives far from here. But what if he suspects the child isn't his? He won't suspect. You calculated the dates perfectly. He thinks it was that reconciliation night you two had." Susan felt the world spin. The baby wasn't Mark's. Amanda had planned everything down to the smallest detail, getting pregnant by her real boyfriend, but making Mark believe he was the father. "And his ex-wife, won't she be a problem?" the man asked. Amanda laughed with contempt. "That poor thing is destroyed. No friends, no job. No one believes her anymore. Even if she suspects something, who's going to listen?" "You're terrible," the man laughed, but there was admiration in his voice. "Terrible and efficient. In a few months, we're rich and free." Susan left the cafe with shaky legs, but with her heart racing for the first time in months. She had the information she needed. She had proof that Amanda wasn't a victim of passion, but a professional criminal. The first thing she did was call Charles. "Charles, I need photos and recordings. Amanda is cheating on Mark with another man." "Ma'am, that won't be cheap. I don't care about the price. I want all possible proof." During this period, Susan transformed into a determined investigator. Along with Charles, she documented all of Amanda's meetings with the real father of the baby. Photographs, recordings, phone conversations. The most shocking thing was discovering that Amanda wasn't just cheating on Mark. She was also stealing from him. She had a secret account where she kept money she withdrew from Mark's company using cards he didn't even know existed. "Mrs. Susan," Charles said during one of the meetings, "this woman is a public danger. She isn't just deceiving your ex-husband. She's committing several types of crimes." But the final discovery was the one that shocked Susan the most. Searching through medical records that Charles managed to access, she discovered something that would change everything. During the time they were married, she and Mark had taken several fertility tests. At the time, the doctors had said the problem was with her, that her hormone levels indicated difficulty getting pregnant. But when she showed those same tests to a family friend doctor, Dr. Miller, he frowned. "Susan, who interpreted these tests?" "The doctor who was treating us at the time." "Why?" "Because the interpretation is completely wrong. Your tests are normal. The problem isn't with you." "What do you mean?" Dr. Miller took Mark's tests and analyzed them carefully. After a few minutes, he raised his head with a grave expression. "Susan, I need to tell you something that will shock you. According to Mark's tests, he has severe azoospermia. That means he is completely sterile. He has no possibility of having children naturally." Susan's world turned upside down. "Completely sterile?" "Completely. If Amanda is pregnant, the baby is definitely not his. At that moment, Susan understood the full dimension of the farce. Mark had abandoned her thinking she was sterile, when in fact, the problem had always been his. Amanda knew this. That's why she had a side affair to get pregnant. But she made Mark believe he was the father. "Doctor, why did the doctor say the problem was mine?" Unfortunately, some professionals prefer to blame the woman, so as not to hurt the male ego. It's a terrible prejudice, but it still happens. Susan left the office with a mixture of rage and relief. Rage for having been unjustly blamed all those years. Relief to know there was never anything wrong with her. That night, organizing all the evidence she had collected, Susan realized she held the power to completely destroy Amanda's farce. She had photos of the cheating, recordings of the conversations, proof of the thefts, and now medical confirmation that Mark was sterile. But she didn't just want to unmask Amanda privately. She wanted to do it in the most public and humiliating way possible. The same way she had been humiliated at the supermarket, in front of everyone. And she knew exactly where that would happen. Mark was organizing a lavish party to announce his marriage to Amanda and officially present the arriving baby. All the friends, the family, the business partners were going to be there. It would be the perfect stage for the biggest revelation of his life. Susan smiled for the first time in months. Amanda thought she had won, that she had managed to deceive everyone perfectly. But she didn't know that the woman she had humiliated and despised had transformed into a force she could never imagine facing. The party would be in a few days, and when it arrived, Susan would be there. Not as the humiliated and defeated ex-wife everyone expected to see, but as the woman who was going to reveal the most shocking truth those people had ever heard. The party was taking place in the most luxurious ballroom in the city. The kind of place where only very wealthy people celebrated the most important moments of their lives. Mark hadn't skimped on anything. Imported flowers, French champagne, an orchestra playing classical music, and a buffet that cost more than most people earn in a year. Amanda was radiant, wearing a beige dress that cost a fortune and perfectly highlighted her already very evident belly. She circled the party receiving congratulations, hugs, and expensive gifts as if she were a princess being crowned. Every person who arrived made sure to touch her belly and wish happiness to the couple. "Mark, you must be over the moon," commented Robert, one of the company partners. "After so much time trying to have children, you finally succeeded." Mark smiled proudly, his hand possessively on Amanda's waist. "It was a wonderful surprise. Amanda gave me the most precious gift a man can receive." Amanda smiled sweetly, but inside, she was calculating how much more money she could extract from Mark before disappearing with the baby's real father. The party was perfect for her aims. Everyone there was a witness that Mark officially assumed paternity. This would strengthen any alimony process in the future. "Amanda, you look beautiful," Kelly approached with an expensive wrapped gift. "You must be so happy to have achieved what Susan could never give Mark." "Thank you, Kelly. It's funny how life works, right? Sometimes the right person was right there, just waiting for the opportunity." Amanda spoke loudly enough for other guests to hear. Every phrase of hers was calculated to humiliate Susan's memory. What none of them expected was that Susan would actually show up at the party, but not in the way they imagined. When the ballroom doors opened and she walked in, a murmur of surprise echoed throughout the room. Susan was completely transformed. Well-cut and styled hair, an elegant dress, impeccable makeup, and most importantly, a confidence no one had seen in her during the terrible period after the divorce. But what really shocked everyone was the man walking in beside her. Dr. Miller was everything Mark was not. Younger, naturally elegant, and most importantly, He treated Susan with a care and respect that was obvious to anyone. "My God, it's Susan!" Someone whispered loud enough to be heard halfway across the room. Amanda almost choked on her champagne when she saw Mark's ex-wife entering as if she owned the place. But what really disturbed her was realizing Susan wasn't alone and seemed genuinely happy beside that man. Mark turned white as a sheet. He wasn't expecting to see Susan there, much less accompanied, and with that confident appearance. Throughout the divorce process, he had grown accustomed to seeing her as a defeated, destroyed woman who accepted any humiliation without reacting. "Who invited her?" Amanda whispered to Mark, trying to keep a smile for the guests. "I don't know. I had no idea she'd come." Dr. Miller led Susan through the ballroom with the kindness of a true gentleman. He pulled out her chair for her to sit, brought drinks, and talked politely with people who approached. It was the kind of treatment Susan had never received from Mark, not even at the beginning of the marriage. "Susan, what a surprise to see you here." Kelly approached with that fake smile people use when caught in embarrassing situations. "How are you?" "I'm great, Kelly. Thank you so much for asking." Susan replied with a serenity that left her old friend disconcerted. "And this gentleman is—" "Dr. Miller, my boyfriend. Steve, this is Kelly, an old acquaintance." Dr. Miller greeted Kelly politely, but without much interest. His focus was on Susan, and anyone who looked could see he truly cared for her. The news that Susan had a doctor boyfriend spread through the party like wildfire. In a few minutes, all the guests knew that Mark's defeated ex-wife wasn't so defeated after all. "Steve, where do you work?" Robert asked, clearly curious about the new situation. "I'm a urologist at St. Anthony's Hospital. And you all, how do you know Susan?" Steve's innocent question created an awkward silence. How to explain that everyone there had abandoned Susan when she needed them most? How to say they chose to side with Mark out of self-interest? That's when Amanda decided to take the initiative. She wasn't going to let Susan steal the attention from her party. "Susan, how nice that you managed to rebuild your life," she said, approaching with her belly showing as if it were a trophy. It must have been hard to get over the disappointment of not being able to give Mark children. The phrase was a calculated stab to humiliate Susan in front of everyone, especially her new boyfriend. Amanda wanted Dr. Miller to know Susan was a flawed woman who couldn't get pregnant. But Susan's reaction was completely different from what Amanda expected. "Thank you for your concern, Amanda. By the way, can I ask you a question about your pregnancy?" "Sure," Amanda replied confidently, thinking Susan was going to ask something like when the baby would be born, or if they knew the sex yet. "How is your real boyfriend? That dark-haired guy who meets you at the cafe downtown?" The silence that fell over the group was deafening. Amanda turned pale, stumbling over her own words. I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't?" Susan took her phone out of her bag with the naturalness of someone commenting on the weather. "Let me refresh your memory." And then, to Amanda's horror and the shock of everyone present, Susan began playing an audio recording. Amanda's voice was unmistakable. "Babe, I can't stand pretending this baby is the old man's anymore. Not much longer. When it's born, we'll disappear with his money and live our lives far from here." The recording continued, every word being like a bomb exploding in the middle of the party. The guests moved closer, incredulous, hearing Amanda confess that the baby wasn't Mark's, that she was stealing his money, that everything was nothing more than an elaborate scam. Mark looked like he had been punched in the stomach. "Amanda, what? How? I can explain everything." Amanda tried desperately to control the situation, but her voice was choked and nervous. "Can you really?" Susan continued with that disturbing calm. "Then explain this, too." And she showed everyone the photos Charles had taken. Amanda kissing another man. Amanda entering and leaving motels with the real father of the child. Amanda using Mark's company credit cards to pay for romantic encounters with her lover. And since we're talking about explanations, Susan continued, addressing Mark directly, Steve has something interesting to tell you about those fertility tests we took. Dr. Miller approached Mark with the professionalism of someone dealing with a patient. Mark, I need to inform you of something about your old tests. Susan showed me the results, and unfortunately, there's a piece of information you didn't receive at the time. What information? According to your tests, you have severe azoospermia. That means you are completely sterile. There is no possibility of you having children naturally. The entire party stopped. Waiters stopped serving drinks. The orchestra stopped playing. 200 people were in total silence, processing the devastating information they had just heard. Mark looked at Amanda, then at Dr. Miller, then at Susan. Sterile? I'm sterile? Completely. Which means if Amanda is pregnant, the baby is definitely not yours. Amanda collapsed. Literally. She sat on a nearby chair, hands on her face, knowing she had been completely unmasked in front of everyone. But how? Why did no one tell me this before? Mark asked, still trying to process the information. Unfortunately, some doctors prefer to blame the woman so as not to hurt the male ego, Dr. Miller explained. It's a terrible prejudice, but it still happens. Susan was unjustly blamed all those years. Mark looked at Susan with an expression that mixed shock, remorse, and shame. Susan, I didn't know. I know you didn't know, Mark, but you knew you were cheating on me. You knew you were humiliating me. You knew you were abandoning me when I needed you most. The party had turned into a public courtroom, and Amanda was the lead defendant. The guests looked at her with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. The woman who minutes before was treated like a princess was now seen as a criminal. Everyone, Susan addressed all those present. I know this situation is embarrassing for you too. Many of you abandoned me when I needed support. You chose to side with Mark because it was more convenient. The embarrassment in the room was palpable. Kelly lowered her head, ashamed. Robert and other partners avoided looking directly at Susan. But I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. I came so that the truth would appear, and so you would know that sometimes the person who seems weakest is actually the strongest. The silence in the room was so heavy, you could hear the sound of people's heels shifting nervously on the marble floor. Amanda remained sitting in the chair, hands covering her face, trying to process that her entire farce had been discovered in the worst possible way. Mark was standing in the middle of the room, looking at everyone as if he had woken from a nightmare, only to discover he was living another even worse one. The information that he was completely sterile was destroying not just his notion of fatherhood, but the entire foundation of what he thought he knew about himself. Amanda. He spoke softly, but his voice echoed in the total silence. Lift your head and look at me. She raised her face slowly, her eyes red and makeup smeared. For the first time since anyone had known her, Amanda didn't look like a confident, calculating woman. She just looked like a person who had been completely exposed. Is it true what Susan is saying? Amanda opened her mouth to try to lie one more time, but realized it was no use. The recordings had been too clear. The photos were incontestable. And Dr. Miller's presence confirmed that Mark really was sterile. Mark, I can explain. Explain then! His voice came out louder this time, loaded with a controlled rage that scared even the closest guests. Explain how you got pregnant by another man and made me believe it was my son. I was afraid of losing you. Lie. Susan broke into the conversation, taking more papers from the gold folder she carried. Amanda, or rather, Tiffany Banks, you weren't afraid of losing anything. You were executing the same scam you've already pulled on at least 3 men before Mark. The real name echoed through the ballroom like a bomb. Tiffany Banks. Amanda wasn't even her real name. Tiffany Banks has a police record for fraud, Susan continued, showing documents to anyone who wanted to see. She specializes in deceiving older, married men with money. The method is always the same. Seduce, separate the man from his wife, and then keep all the money, apartment, car. That's not true! Amanda tried to defend herself, but her voice was weak, lacking conviction. Isn't it? Susan opened another folder. Here are the names of the other men you deceived. John Smith, real estate entrepreneur, bankrupt paying alimony for a child that wasn't his. Kevin Miller, owner of a pharmacy chain, had severe depression when he found out the truth. Arthur Davis, lawyer. Stop! Stop it! Amanda screamed, getting up from the chair. But her scream only confirmed that it was all true. Mark turned even paler. How many men did you deceive before me? Mark, please let me explain in private. There is no more private, he replied coldly. You lied to 200 people here today. You can speak in front of all of them. Dr. Miller approached Mark, realizing the man was too shaken. Mark, you need to sit down. This revelation can cause a very large shock. I'm fine. No, you're not. As a doctor, I can see you're in a state of shock. You need to process this information calmly. But Mark didn't want calm. He wanted answers. He turned to Amanda with an expression no one had seen before. The baby. Whose baby is it? Amanda hesitated, looking around the ballroom, searching for an exit that didn't exist. All the guests were looking at her, waiting for an answer. It's Brian's, she whispered. Who is Brian? My boyfriend. The confession fell like a lightning bolt in the middle of the party. Mark had to lean on a chair so as not to fall. Your boyfriend? You have a boyfriend and you're pregnant with his child? Yes. And you made me believe it was my son? Yes. Why? Why did you do this to me? Amanda looked at all the faces around her, seeing disgust, contempt, disappointment. She had nothing left to lose. Maybe it was time to speak the full truth for the first time in her life. Because you're rich and he's poor, she said with a coldness that shocked everyone. Because you could give my son a good life and he couldn't. So it was never about love? Love? Amanda laughed, but it was a bitter, humorless laugh. Mark, did you really think a 25-year-old woman was going to fall in love with a 47-year-old married man just for his charm? The cruelty of the response cut the silence like a blade. Mark realized he had been used in the coldest way possible. You never felt anything for me? I felt gratitude. You gave me a good house, expensive clothes, a new car. But love? Please. Kelly, who had been watching everything from afar, approached Susan. Susan, how did you find out all this? I hired a private investigator. I spent all this time investigating Amanda. Tiffany. I knew there was something wrong. But why didn't you tell Mark before? Susan looked at her old friend with an expression that mixed hurt and understanding. Kelly, do you really think Mark would have believed me? After everything that happened? After all of you chose his side? The embarrassing question echoed through the ballroom. How many people there had abandoned Susan when she needed them most? How many had chosen to side with Mark and Amanda out of convenience? Besides, Susan continued, I needed irrefutable proof. I couldn't come here with just suspicions. I needed to be absolutely certain of every accusation. Dr. Miller placed his hand on Susan's shoulder affectionately. And you got all the necessary proof? I did. But it wasn't easy. It took time, money, and most importantly, courage to face the truth. Mark approached Susan slowly, with a humility no one had seen in him before. Susan, I don't even know where to begin apologizing. You don't need to apologize for being deceived, Mark. You need to apologize for abandoning me so cruelly. You're right. I abandoned you in the worst possible way. I blamed you for something that was never your fault. All those years of marriage, I felt flawed. I thought I had some problem, that I couldn't give you the child you wanted. And I let you believe that. You did. Worse yet, you used that as an excuse to cheat on me. The dialogue between the ex-spouses was being watched by 200 people, but it seemed too intimate to be public. It was the reckoning that should have happened a long time ago. Amanda realized she had completely lost control of the situation. She tried one last desperate card. "Mark, I know I messed up, but the baby needs a father. You can continue to be his father, even knowing the truth." The suggestion was so absurd that several people let out gasps of incredulity. "You have the nerve to ask that after everything you did?" Mark looked at her with disgust. "After humiliating me, lying to me, using me. I'm thinking of the baby. You're thinking of the child support I was going to pay," he cut in coldly. "Of the apartment I was going to give. Of the money you were going to keep receiving." Amanda lowered her head, knowing she had been caught even in the last detail of her aims. "Mark," Susan cut in once more, "there's one more thing you don't know about Amanda." "What else?" "She was stealing money from your company. There are credit cards in the company's name you didn't even know existed." Mark turned red with rage. "What do you mean, stealing?" Susan showed bank statements that Charles had managed to get. Dozens of expensive purchases, dinners at luxury restaurants, weekend trips, all paid for with money from his company. "Amanda, is this true?" She didn't answer, but the silence was confirmation enough. "How much?" Mark asked coldly. "How much what?" "How much did you steal from me?" Amanda murmured something inaudible. "Speak up." $50,000, more or less. The number exploded in the ballroom like one more bomb. $50,000 stolen, in addition to everything she had already gained as his girlfriend. "More or less." Mark was losing his composure. "What do you mean, more or less?" It could have been 60 or 70. The coldness with which Amanda spoke about the stolen money was the last straw for many guests. Some people began leaving the party, too embarrassed to continue watching that spectacle. But others were hypnotized by the magnitude of the farce that had been revealed. "Amanda," Susan said with disturbing calm, "I think it's time for you to go." "Go where?" "Anywhere far from here. The party is over for you." Amanda looked around, searching for at least one person who would show a little compassion. But every face she saw showed only contempt and disgust. She grabbed her bag and headed for the exit, walking slowly as if expecting someone to call her back. But no one said a thing. 200 people watched in silence as Amanda left the party, Mark's life, and probably the city. When the doors closed behind her, the silence continued for a few seconds, until someone began to clap, and others joined in. And in a few seconds, the entire party was applauding Susan. It wasn't an applause of celebration. It was an applause of recognition, of respect, of admiration for a woman who had been completely destroyed and managed to rise again masterfully. Susan smiled for the first time in a long time, a genuine smile of someone who had finally found peace. The days following the party were like the waves of an emotional tsunami hitting the lives of everyone involved. The whole city was talking about what had happened in that luxury ballroom, and social media talked of nothing else. Mark spent the first days locked in the apartment he once shared with Amanda, trying to process the scale of what he had lost. Not just the stolen money or the public humiliation. He had lost something much more precious, the notion of who he really was and what he was really worth. When he finally gathered the courage to leave home, his first stop was at Dr. Mel Miller's office. He needed to understand more about his medical condition. But most importantly, he needed a bridge to get to Susan. "Dr. Miller, I need to talk to Susan. I need to apologize for real, away from all that mess at the party." Steve looked at him with the seriousness of someone who knew human pain well. "Mark, Susan went through profound trauma because of you. She is rebuilding herself, finding peace. Are you sure you want to disturb her again? I just want her to know that I understand the magnitude of my mistake, that I recognize how badly I treated her. And after? What do you expect to happen after? Mark was silent for a while. Nothing. I don't expect anything. I just want her to have the peace of hearing a sincere apology. Steve agreed to talk to Susan, and to Mark's surprise, she agreed to meet him. But not alone. Steve would be present, and it would be in a public and neutral place. The meeting took place in a discreet coffee shop, away from the hustle and bustle of downtown. When Mark arrived, Susan was already there, talking quietly with Steve. She looked completely different from the shattered woman he had left behind. Susan. Mark approached hesitantly. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Sit down, Mark. Let's talk like adults. He sat down, observing her face. There was a serenity there he had never seen before, as if she had gone through a painful process, but one that had strengthened her in an irreversible way. I came to apologize, sincere apologies, without trying to justify myself. I'm listening. Susan, I destroyed our life because of a fantasy. I thought Amanda was everything I wanted, when in fact, you were always everything I needed. She listened in silence, showing neither rage nor hurt, just respectful attention. I blamed you for us not being able to have children, when the problem was always with me. I abandoned you cruelly. I let Amanda humiliate you. I allowed you to lose your job. Mark. Susan interrupted him softly. Are you finished? No. There's one more thing I need to say. I loved you. I always loved you. But I didn't know how to demonstrate that love in a mature way. I confused whim with passion, novelty with happiness. Susan nodded. Thank you for those words. That's what I needed to hear to have peace. Susan, is there any possibility of... No, Mark, there isn't. The response was direct, but not cruel, just definitive. We had our story. It was beautiful at times, painful at others, but it ended the way it had to end. What do you mean? It showed me who I really am when I lose everything. It taught me I can rise again on my own. It made me discover that I deserve to be truly loved. Steve smiled discreetly, seeing the maturity with which Susan handled the situation. And Amanda? Mark asked. Did you hear what happened to her? Amanda went back to her hometown. From what I heard, Brian, the baby's father, is no longer with her. And the baby? He'll be born and raised by Amanda's mother. At least he'll have a family that can give true love. Mark lowered his head. Everyone lost in this story. Not everyone, Susan corrected. I gained a lot. Gained what? After all you went through? I gained self-knowledge. I gained strength I didn't know I had. I gained the certainty that I can start over as many times as necessary. And most importantly, she looked at Steve with genuine affection. I gained someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I can give or not give. Steve held Susan's hand over the table in a simple gesture, but one that spoke louder than 1,000 words. Susan, Mark tried once more. If someday you want to try again, Mark, listen carefully. I forgive you. I forgive everything you did to me. But forgiving doesn't mean coming back. Forgiving means moving on in peace. And if I change, if I prove I can be different, you need to change for yourself, not for me. You need to discover who you really are when you're not trying to impress anyone. Dr. Miller decided to join the conversation. Mark, can I make a medical suggestion? Sure. Seek professional help. A therapist. You went through trauma too. You were deceived, manipulated, used. That leaves marks that need to be treated. You think I need therapy? I think everyone needs it at some point in life, especially after situations like this. Mark nodded, realizing that perhaps that really was the path to rebuilding himself. Susan, can I ask one last question? You can. Can you be happy after everything that happened? For the first time in the meeting, Susan smiled. Mark, I am already happy. Happy in a way I never was before. How so? When I was married to you, my happiness depended on your approval, your mood, your decisions. Now, my happiness comes from within. From knowing who I am, what I'm capable of, and how much I'm worth. And Steve is part of that happiness? He is, but as a complement, not as the foundation. The foundation is myself. The conversation came to a natural close. Mark understood there was no going back, but he also understood that perhaps there shouldn't be. Susan, thank you for everything you taught me, even unintentionally. I'm glad you managed to learn something. They said goodbye at the coffee shop door, a respectful handshake, without rancor, but also without longing. Steve and Susan walked together down the street, holding hands, talking about future plans. Are you sure you don't want to try again with him? Steve asked, more out of curiosity than insecurity. I'm absolutely sure. Some bridges, when they burn, shouldn't be rebuilt. They should only serve to take us to the other side. And what other side is that? The side where I know who I am. Where I don't need to diminish myself for anyone to feel bigger. Where I can be loved for who I really am. Sometime later, people learned that Susan and Steve had gotten married in an intimate ceremony, only with people who truly mattered. Nothing ostentatious, nothing to impress. Just two people who chose each other for true love. Mark never again related seriously to anyone. He took therapy for 2 years, learned about himself, about his insecurities, about the difference between love and possession. He rebuilt his company, paid all the debts Amanda had made, and today lives a simpler but truer life. Amanda was never seen in the city again. The baby was born healthy and was raised by his grandmother, far from all that mess. Sometimes people comment that they've seen her in other cities, always after rich men, always with the same story of a woman in love and pregnant. Kelly and the other friends who abandoned Susan tried to approach her again after the party, but she was polite and firm. Thank you, but I don't need your friendship anymore. I learned to value quality, not quantity. 2 years later, Susan discovered she was pregnant with Steve's child. The most important lesson that remained from this whole story wasn't about betrayal or revenge. It was about resilience, about the capacity every human being has to rise from the worst situations and come out stronger on the other side. Susan proved that no matter how many times life knocks us down, we can always choose to get up. No matter how many people abandon us, we can always choose to find ourselves. No matter how many lies they tell us, we can always choose to live in the truth. And most importantly, she proved that self-love is the only love that can never be taken from us. It is the only one truly worth cultivating, because it is the base of all the others. Today, when someone asks Susan if she regrets anything, she replies, I regret taking so long to discover my own value, but I thank life for giving me the opportunity to find it. Because sometimes, losing everything is the only way to discover that we never needed anything beyond ourselves to be completely happy. End of story.